Alrighty.
Not working.
Yeah, it's live.
Sweet.
All right. Just make sure I'm on the right profile first. Alrighty. Sweet. Good to go. All right. So good morning and welcome. It's not a little early. If you pay attention, it starts at 10:30. Good morning. This is the Uncle Fish Bucktails Talk Show. Today we have Brian Ernest. Brian is a Block Island and Newport legend. So Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And where do you want to start? Let's start with where fishing and striped bass began for you.
Probably like most Newport kids, it started at the Goat Island Causeway. As a little kid, my mom owned a liquor store, so that wasn't the coolest place for a little kid to hang around. So she would take me and drop me off down the causeway, and I could just spend all day down there fishing and talking to all the different old guys and trying to just learn every single thing I could about any kind of fish that came out. There were always pogies down there, so I could always snag as many pogies as possible. I, for some reason, always seemed to be the kid that had the bucket with the most pogies in it. And I happened to meet one of the local big fishermen down there, a guy named Joe Perry, and he would get out of work and come down to the causeway and try and snag pogies, and sometimes he wouldn't do too good, so he would end up buying them from me. And that happened 2 or 3 times, and then he started to invite me to go with him because it was easier than buying them off. He'd just take me with him. So he would throw my bike in the back of his truck, and he would take me out fishing at night and then bring me home and drop me off. And that's...
How old were you then when that was going on?
I was about 14, I'd say, or 15. And that's what really got the juices flowing, was Joe Perry showing me all about Newport, taking me to all the different spots at night. And as long as I had a full bucket of bait when he got out of work, he'd take me anywhere that the fish were. So he kept us pretty plugged in. It was fun.
So were you, so you're 14, 15, you're in school age.
Yep.
Were you were on your bicycle?
Yeah.
So did getting a car take you into a new area of fishing, or because you were on the island where you just you were able to get everywhere you wanted to go? Or where did transportation from a young age take it?
Oh, that was once I got my first car. That was crazy because I had already kind of gotten dialed in by riding my bike and going fishing with Joe and learning all the spots. I knew all the places to go to. So once I got a car, that just opened up everything. Now I could start spending a lot more time fishing, but that definitely made things a lot better having a car.
So from fishing with Joe Perry, where did you go from there? Where did Joe get you into fishing in Block Island? Did you kind of make it over there on your own, or where did it go from there?
No, it was all because of Joe. Joe got me involved in the Newport County Saltwater Fishing Club, which then I met all of the big name guys that, you'd see all their pictures on the wall at the bait shop, all these guys, and you knew who all the big guys were. And then now I'm in the club and I'm surrounded by all these guys. So those kind of things, like meeting all those people and fishing with Joe, it just kind of all progressed and led one thing after another. And then finally Block Island, we started hearing about Block Island, and I finally got a chance to go in 1987. That was my first time over with Joe. And we had the day off of school. It was November 11th, I guess it was a Veterans Day holiday. So we didn't have to go to school that day. So we were going to go from Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But the day we were trying to go over on Wednesday, we couldn't get over there. It was a horrible storm had set in and the ferry was canceled. So we had gone back and forth to the ferry at least 5 or 6 times to try and get onto the boat. We couldn't get on the boat. So boat left, night ended.
And how old are you right now when this is going on?
16, 15, going on 16, probably right around, because my birthday was the 10th.
Yeah.
So I had just turned 16 that day, and the next day we were trying to come over to the island. So we figured we would try going by plane because I had heard that there were people going over on planes. So we called the Westerly Airport, and they said they had one plane leaving that day. It was an emergency plane, and it was carrying medical supplies to the island. And if our rods fit, we could fly.
Okay.
So
what are you fishing for a rod? So you're going to Block Island. You're in an airplane.
Yep.
And what are you bringing with you?
All right, I'm bringing one.
And what year are we talking about right now?
1987.
1987.
Yeah, I have an 8-foot Montague 903H was the rod I was using. It was a one-piece fiberglass 8-foot rod with a
an 8-foot rod. So you're going surf casting with an 8-foot rod.
Yep.
Okay.
As a little kid, I couldn't swing a very big rod, so I used a shorter, stiffer rod, but was really moderate. It had a lot of bend to it, and those old Peterson/Montague fiberglass planks were really good for that. Lamb of Glass had a yellow honey stick that was really good bait fishing rod too, especially if you cut it down.
I remember seeing that.
But so thank God both of our rods fit. They were both short. They were both under 9 feet. They fit under the seats of the plane. We got on the plane, my friend Jerry Perry and I, whose dad was going to pick us up. He was already over there. And we flew over on the plane about 150 feet to 200 feet above the water in 65-mile-an-hour winds. The seas had to be, 15 to 20 feet.
I remember asking my mom if I could take my bike to the skate park, and she said no. You're 15 in an airplane flying to Block Island.
Neither one of us had flown. I'm hanging on to the back of the seat. Poor Jerry's next to me throwing up in one of those air sickness bags. And nobody on the island knows we're coming. Because there's no there's no cell phones. There's no cell phones back then. And there's no communication. So when we called the hotel to tell them that we were getting on a plane, we found a plane that was lucky enough to take us over there. There was nobody around. Those guys were out doing things. They're at Block Island, and they don't expect us to come because the ferries are all canceled, so we're not showing up. So by the time we got there, we landed at the airport. There's no one to pick us up. So we went in and used the phone at the airport and called the lady at the hotel. And she left her building and went up to the hotel where all the guys were staying and found one person that could get a hold of Joe that could put word out to come get us. So then somebody finally came and got us, and it was Joe's father-in-law, Opa. He was a German guy, Gerhard Busch, and he came and picked us up.
Is this your first experience on Block Island?
First experience on Block Island. I had never fished there before.
And this is the night before the snowstorm blitz, or where is this in relation to the snowstorm blitz? Or do I have that wrong?
This is it's the night, pretty much the night before the snowstorm blitz. The night we got there, it may even have been the day of the snowstorm blitz, because the day we got there, they picked us up, they brought us back to the hotel, we met up with everybody. We were only able to go squid fishing that night. We wanted to go right to Southwest Point. We had heard that somebody had pulled his gun out the night before and had threatened people on the point with a gun. So there was no chance Joe was taking 2 kids at Southwest Point.
Right.
And that was like, when we were on the plane going over, that's all I could think about was, I can't wait to get to Southwest Point and see what that's like.
So not to steer off the path of, you going over to Block Island on this plane, but they're breaking a gun out. Like, I think that's a really good way to show people how serious it was. It was, the striped bass back then, because it was money. It wasn't just catching fish like it is now. It was how you guys were making a living.
That was one of the things that I didn't, as a kid, one of the things I didn't realize. I was naive to the whole thing, but all the adults had some way of networking their fish to get what they needed on the island, whether they were putting them on pallets and sending them off the island. And we would do that every morning. We would go down to the ferry and watch the pallets get loaded. And there were monster fish, 40, 50, 60 pounders. And the guys had to tag them. They would put like a cardboard tag on the tail and one on the head. They would stack them on a pallet. They'd cover them with like an oiled burlap sack. And then the forklift would just put the pallets on the ferry. And the ferry would take off, and we'd leave there and go to breakfast at the airport, and we'd watch them load pallets on planes, and those planes were usually going right to New York.
Okay.
But that was one of the things I didn't realize, is how much money was being made behind the scenes. I was just looking at it as a kid from a fishing standpoint, like, this is the best thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how much money was involved, and that's where tensions started to get, guys started to get a lot more tight-lipped. No one's telling anybody anything. Guys are not turning their headlights on, keeping their rod tips low, burying fish in the sand, hiding fish in the cliffs so that no one would see what was going on. It was really pretty crazy.
So you're back to, you're on the island. You got to go squidding that night. Where to go from there?
We went squidding that night, and then after going squidding, he had to bring us back to the hotel because he wasn't gonna take us out during the middle of the night. And of course, he wanted to fish too. So they had their tides and times all set down. So anytime they didn't want kids around, they would just bring us back to the hotel and drop us off, and we play video games. And then they'd go out fishing.
But you were itching. You were pissed. You were pissed, right?
That you had to sit at the hotel. I was going nuts. I had all my leaders tied up. I had everything ready to go, and I got my stuff right by the door. Like, all I need is an opportunity to go. I don't want to sit here. So anyways, we went to bed that night, we fell asleep, and we woke up the next morning, and most of the guys were back. Not all of the guys were back at the hotel. And I looked outside, and it had snowed. Everything was covered with snow. Everyone's rods were frozen in their truck. And so I got dressed quick and went outside just to see what was going on. Block Island in the snow is pretty cool. So I went outside to check it out, and I look, and there's this pickup truck and two giant humps next to the pickup truck in snow. Massive, massive piles of snow. It's kind of weird. It was the only undisturbed snow out of the whole area. So I went over and I started digging it out, and under the snow was a 57 and a 62
pounds.
Yeah,
pounds.
57 and a 62
Holy shit.
pounder just laying next to this truck, buried over with snow. So I just keep on digging, because once I see I get the eye, and so I just keep on digging and digging. And I bury him. One of the guys that caught the fish was in the hotel above me, and he caught me, and he yelled out, "Get away from them fish!" And he came right down the stairs. The screaming and yelling caused all the rest of the adults to come out. And then, calmer heads prevailed once everyone came out, but they were super protective of those two fish.
Who were those guys?
It was Tom Vanderkeef with the 57 and Al Polini with the 62.
Wow.
And still to this day, they're the two biggest fish I've ever seen in my life, like in person right there where you can touch them.
Were those the guys that Steve Campo would fish with?
Yeah. There was that hotel that we stayed in. I didn't realize at the time until you get older and you realize the significance of the names, but there were a lot of big surf casting names in that hotel. Dennis Ambrata and his crew were there. Stevie Campo and his crew from Long Island were there. Al Polini was there. Charlie Dodge was there. Jack Linton was there. Andy Lamar was there. I fished as a kid I was surrounded by the greatest surfcasters of my time. And I kind of didn't know it.
Yeah.
They were all just guys, and I just kept my mouth closed and did a lot of listening. And then when I had the opportunity, I asked a lot of questions because I wanted to try and absorb as much from these guys as I could. But it was a very cool group of guys. I was very fortunate. Everywhere I happened to go, I was surrounded by guys who were very, very good fishermen.
So were all of these guys, because you're a bait fisherman, right? And now, we all talk about striped bass fishing, and everybody talks about plugs and who's got the best and which one costs $25 and which one is $125. But you don't spend your money on plugs; you spend your money on pokies.
Yep.
So where did that begin?
That all started with Joe. Joe was a fabulous bait fisherman. And he kind of cut my teeth on that. He taught me how to get everything set up, how to make my rigs, and how to chum, and show you where to fish. And a lot of times I didn't realize that he would do that because it was like taking a kid to the pond and catching sunfish. You could just put the bait on, set the kids up over there. They're good to go. And now I can take my plug and go hit this reef with my cleats on and get into a little bit more dangerous area and just keep looking over your shoulder. So.
And see you, and you're doing fine.
Us, and we're doing our thing, and we're catching fish, and we're fine. So, but I just always stuck with the bait for some reason. It seemed to make more sense to me. It smelled, it was natural. I was successful with it, so there was no reason to change. So I just stuck with the bait. But Joe was definitely the guy that cut my teeth with bait fishing.
So now, can you kind of take us through, how you bait fish? One of the, I've thrown a pokey chunk before, and I've used a bank sinker and, on a small leader, and it can slide back and forth on my line. And, you just kind of send it out there and you just sit and wait. But when I started bait fishing with you, you do a lot of amazing things when it comes to bait, and you really got it uh, broken down into a science. Now, so can you take us through that science if you don't mind?
That that evolution is a result of fishing with guys who are surf casters and throw plugs.
Really?
Most of the guys that I fished with or took instruction from or listened to or hung around with, all amazing surf casters, all of them. And I
Yes, he
and
does. Yes, he
what
does.
is it? Sorry?
Brian, you always Sam's bait and tackle said you always want to know if the pogies are in.
Yeah, Brian does a pretty good job at Sam's of keeping me stocked with fresh bait. Hey, if you need fresh bait, go to Sam's Bait and Tackle in Middletown. That is absolutely the spot to get your stuff. And now Uncle Fish Bucktails.
Yes, thank you. That's great.
Um, so yeah, that was all a progression of fishing with guys that surf cast because those guys move. They're hitting points, they're moving, they're finding pockets of fish. And I started to realize that if I'm stationary on my bucket in one spot, I'm at the mercy of the fish coming to me.
Yeah.
But if I want to fish with my friends and surf cast, I've got to find a way to be mobile. I've got to be able to cut these chunks and put them in a bag and stuff them in my pocket. Bring 6 or 8 rigs with me in a pocket. And I've got to have my bucket on a shoulder sling so that I can get myself and follow you guys and chase you guys. Because if you're finding pockets of fish, there's no reason I can't be on a rock 100 yards to the right of you in the same pocket of fish, doing my bait fishing thing, still in my zone, but still catching fish like you guys. So that's where that progression started. Was I had to become mobile so that I could fish Block Island and hit point after point after point and not just be a stationary bait guy who sits on his bucket, Joe Six-Pack style, and doesn't move.
And you never do a sand spike, right? You never have.
Absolutely not.
You're always holding your rod.
Never, ever, if you're bait fishing, put your rod in the rocks or a sand spike. Hold on to that. You've seen my rod. There's absolutely no handle. I have worn through the handle to the bare graphite.
Brian's rod, and it's a one piece because that's what he fishes, and that's what he got me into one pieces. But he holds it in the same position every single time, waiting for a bite. That the thumb on the cork handle is worn down to the blank of the rod. So everything he's saying, I can vouch for. It's totally truthful. So spent some time sitting on a bucket, right?
Yeah.
But you're always, every 15 seconds you're bumping your bait in, right?
Yeah.
So you're not just sending it out there and letting it sit. You're bumping it in.
I'm plugging with my chunk.
You're plugging with your chunk.
Plugging with my chunk. I'm using the smallest possible weight. I don't want that thing pegged to the bottom, and I don't want the bait stationary. Everything under the water is moving with current.
Yeah.
All the seaweed's moving. Everything's flowing. I want my bait to have that exact same presentation. I want it to move. If a wave comes, I want the wave to be able to move it naturally. So I don't want it stuck to the bottom. And if I feel like my bait is sitting on the bottom for too long, I'm going to move it and keep moving it. And I'll drag it right in until it's 10 or 15 feet in front of me and then throw it back out. So for a bait fisherman, I'm making quite a few casts in a night, and I am dragging that bait. That bait's moving an awful lot.
Definitely, man. Definitely a lot of casts. More. How long does a cast rotation last for you with a piece of bait? Because I feel like all the time on social media we see, right, like we're bait fishing and it's like 11-foot rods stuffed into a sand spike into the sand. But your interpretation of bait fishing that you've done your whole life. How old are you now?
52.
So you've done it for 45 years or something like that, or 40 years. So the way that you bait fish for the last 40 years is completely different than what we usually see.
Yeah.
So how long does the rotation take of bait?
It depends pretty much. Like, if there's a lot of crabs in the air, if I'm fishing a lot of sand,
Average.
Of crabs in there, but maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
10 or 15 minutes for one soak.
Yeah.
A soak, Bob the garbage man, a soak. All right.
10 or 15 minutes, but then I'm taking that chunk. As soon as I'm done with it, I bring it back up to the cutting board, and then that chunk will become chum, and it will go back out into the area where I'm at. But I don't like fishing washed out chunks. I like them really fresh and really bloody.
So the chum thing, which I think is really cool to talk about. Can we talk about how you call fish in to what you're doing with your chum slick. Take us through that process of calling in the fish with your chum.
That was in Newport. You can always find a nice little pocket of area where you got some nice water and the lower current, and you can chum that area up. And you're not really calling the fish to you so much. You're just putting an awful lot of smell in the water so that any fish that comes down, you're slowing him down and keeping him in your area. He is not going to swing through your area real fast on a real fast hunt. He's going to get the smell of the oil. There'll be some pieces on the ground where he'll be able to pick up and get a taste of what's going on. And I've got my chunk sitting right in the middle of all of that mess. But that is like one of my most successful techniques. I can't tell you how many fish I've caught where you get the fish up onto the rocks and you're getting the hook out and he's shaking and he's just puking up mouthfuls of chum, where you've been able to hold that fish in front of you for a little bit of time to get him to eat your chum.
So you've got a story where you were fishing and you were fishing on opposite schedules of somebody else, and you were kind of using their chum slick. What was going on there?
There's a spot in Newport, Ruggles Avenue. It's a famous fishing spot, surfing spot. The tide always drags to the left, and on the end of the left of the beach is a big rock crop. And all the chum always drags left and sits in that little corner. And I learned that one day fishing down there early in the morning. There's always guys there that fish there at night. They always chum real heavy. And the chum always drags down to the left. So I went down there one morning and I noticed the seagulls working in that corner of the beach. So I went down there and I threw my chunk and I ended up getting a fish about 35 pounds or so. So I learned that pretty quickly. So I would fish out the Ocean Drive at night, and if I had extra pogies left over, at the end of the night, I would go to Ruggles Avenue and I would visit with those guys. And I'd say, hey, I've got some extra pogies. Do you guys want to throw them in for chum? Yeah, sure. We'll take the extra bait. Everybody loves extra chum. So I'd give them a dozen pogies, and they'd chum real heavy for me. And then I'd wake up an hour before work and go down. Those guys are long home. And I'd slip into the left-hand corner of that little beach and fish in all their chum. So they would chum for me at night, and I'd wake up in the morning and go down and reap the benefit of their labor.
Did they ever find that out?
They just did.
Yeah, right.
But I would take those fish and run them down to the restaurant in the morning and drop them off at the restaurant and make a little bit of money and then go off to work.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so that worked out well. That was a fun little project.
And when you're purchasing pogies, right? Like, I don't know. I first started my surf casting journey with pogies, and I would sometimes be able to snag them up in the Providence River near the hurricane barrier, or in like, I'm around Warwick. So not to talk about fishing spots, but just places that I've found bait. Just kind of around the marinas and stuff in Warwick.
Yeah.
So that's where I've been able to find pogies, but I would get like 3 or 4 and chop them up, and I'd be happy with what I got. I'd use the whole pogie. I didn't really have. My preference was a belly piece, but when I started learning about how you chunk pogie, you buy like a dozen or 2 dozen pogies, and half of them are just for chumming, and half of them are pogies that you're going to use for bait.
Fish with, yeah.
So what part of a pogie is your favorite part of a pogie to use for a chunk?
My absolute favorite piece is the tail section.
The tail section.
I cut the fin off up about 2.5 inches and then cut that off, and I use that triangular tail piece. That's absolutely my favorite.
Now, why is that your favorite piece as opposed to like the head or the belly? Because like myself, maybe some of you guys are thinking like guts and blood and juice, and that's in the head and the belly. Why do you like the tail section so much? So like just to think of it of like we're in thirds, right? So like the pogie is in thirds, so like you're the last third of the fish. So not a little piece, the last third of the pogie. Okay.
I'm using the tail third. I found that the belly chunks are good. Like you said, they got a lot of smell in them and a lot of stink in them, but there's a small amount of meat between the top of the fish and that backbone, and pogies are inherently soft. So if you're not getting these pogies like fresh off the boat, which most of the time you usually can't, they're a couple days old by the time you get them at the bait shop, and you're at the mercy of how the guy at the bait shop takes care of them. If you don't have a good bait shop and they don't take care of your pogies well, you're going to get some pretty soft bait. Those middle sections have a tendency to just fly off the hook. So I use those softer.
And you lose those guts quick.
You lose the guts immediately right on the cast. So that all becomes usually my chum. That's the base for my chum, all that good smell. And I use the tail chunk as it tapers down. You're getting a lot less meat above the backbone. So if the pogey is soft and mushy, you can actually put the hook under the backbone, and because it's tapered, it's going to rip out quick as soon as you set the hook, you know?
Okay.
So that's why I use the tail. It's a little easier to get it under the backbone. It helps keep the bait on the hook if it's a little bit softer, so it's not flying off because the hook's under the backbone. But you can rip it right out on a hook set, so you're going to get a good stick.
Are you leaving the scales on your pogies? Have you ever descaled the pogie before you used it as bait?
Yeah,
you did descale pogies.
I have.
Why? What's the reasoning there?
It all depends, and these are all techniques that I've learned over the course of the years from different guys that I fished with, primarily Joe Perry. Sometimes the fish just don't want to take the bait. They will play with it. It's not like, I'm imagining when you're dragging a plug, you're pulling it through the water, the fish grabs it, it's kind of an instant hook set.
Sometimes they grab it, man, believe it or not. Sometimes they grab a plug, and like, I think what my philosophy, not to go off on a tangent here, but of course I don't have a plug around me. There's 400 plugs in this room, but they're all over the place. I think that they'll sometimes just grab a part of the plug that doesn't have a hook on it. Like they'll grab the top and then just
do that with the needlefish.
You know, they
short
just
hit it. Yeah. And you wonder how they don't.
How am I not hooked up?
Yeah.
Like you got a Gibbs bottle. That's why he's got 350 trebles on it.
But the bait's a little bit different though, you know. They're a little more intimate with the fish because you get a chance to spend a little time with him. He's gonna pick it up, he's gonna roll it around in his mouth until he gets it just right. If it doesn't taste right, he's gonna drop it and throw it away. So you get a chance to like be with the fish for a minute, and if they're not taking it, you're baffled. You got a perfectly good piece of bait out there, it's perfectly fresh, it's in his mouth, I can feel him moving it. Why is he not taking it? So you just start trying to come up with anything you can. I've taken a pogie and filleted it and used just a fillet to take the bone out of it so that bait has absolutely no structure to it whatsoever anymore. And the fish can just smash it and get it right down his throat. Perfect. But scaling them, sometimes I don't know if it releases extra oil under the scales of the pogies, but you draw at straws when they're biting the bait and they're not taking it down. You just start trying to figure out any way you can. And some nights, if you're scaling pogies, you're scaling pogies to get hits.
Now, it hasn't always been pogies, right? That you've chunked. You also chunk squid a lot.
Lots of squids.
Lots of squids. Where did chunking squids and like, are you getting your own? Were you getting your own bait when you're like, so peak? Let's go back to your peak. Fishing when you were fishing to, it was helping you make a living and helping you pay for your house and that stuff. Where was your bait coming from? Pogie, squid, let's go there.
So the squids, Newport is a great place to catch squid. One of the best squid runs around. So I would start around like April 15th or 20th, and I would fish every single night as long as I could until I got about 250 pounds of squid in the freezer. And that would last me through spring. That usually took me till about Mother's Day to get that much squid in the freezer. Sleep deprivation and many hours of just standing out there jigging. And but once I got the squid in the freezer, I was good. Now I can fish through the spring. And about 4th of July weekend is when I change over to pogies. And at the time when I was fishing younger, we had trap companies in Newport. So you could go down to the trap companies and buy 100 pounds of pogies in a tote for $35. So bait was a lot cheaper and a lot easier to get, as opposed to now where they're $25 a dozen. So,
$2 or $3 a piece.
I'm throwing significantly more money in the water now than I was when I was a kid. But that's where pogies came from for sure. And then we always had a great mackerel run in Newport, so you could get mackerel. And the trap boats. Every once in a while, the trap boats would come in with all kinds of different things on board. We would sometimes steal butterfish. Butterfish is an excellent straight bass bait. If I could find my butterfish on a trap boat, I would grab 3 or 4 of those and always use those.
Really?
Yeah, butterfish are great.
Now, when you were talking about a fillet, you would sometimes like fillet the pogie. Did you do that with any other fish? So you just want it like floating out there, right? And it's just going like this, and the fish are just coming by. like and just swiping it sometimes, or does it always like you're talking about a striper will like kind of play with it a little bit and then pick it up and take it? You had a couple 30-pound fish for sure, and at least 140 this year, right?
Yeah.
So did those fish you smoke your bait, or did they pick it up and play with it like you're talking about and go?
Those fish all this year, they all smoked it. But I was fortunate the time that I was fishing this year was all big water.
Yeah.
And the fish usually do not play around with it in big water. It's a delicate balance when you're in the big water. You got to find just enough weight to stick your bait to the bottom. But so that when the biggest wave of the set comes through, it moves.
Okay.
Once you can find that,
like how much movement are we looking for?
Couple of feet. You don't want it to blow along. Okay. You just want it to like bounce and stick.
You're using a monofilament, right? You're using You're using Andes.
Andy, 30-pound test Andy.
And
I think I'm the last guy on the rocks that's still using monofilament. I think everybody has changed over to some sort of Spectra or Power.
And like Andy line, right? Is that from Block? Was everybody using Andy 20 or something like that?
That was just a Newport bait fishing.
That was a Newport
thing. All the Newport bait fishing guys, which is funny because Newport only seems to make bait fishermen. Anywhere I've ever gone, like Narragansett, there are no bait fishing guys in Narragansett. There are no bait fishing guys down the South County. Just seemed to be a Newport thing. Any bait fisherman always had something to do with Newport. But that was the line you needed. Everybody had a 704. If you were a serious bait fisherman, you had a 704, and your your reel was packed with pink Andy.
Gotcha. And you were fishing Penn 704s?
Yep.
Were you doing any kind of drilling out your reels to keep water going through, or and you guys were servicing. You guys were servicing like all your own reels, right?
Yeah, at any point in time at Block Island, I had 3.
Or you were the guy.
I was.
You were the guy. Yeah.
I had 3 Penn reels serviced in the back of my truck at all times. And if for some reason somebody would blow out a reel, they would put out word to try and find me. Where's Ernest fishing? And they would get a hold of me, and they would give me their 704 with no spool on it, and I'd give them a 704 back, and they'd put their stuff on. They'd take the reel and go off. I'd rebuild the reel for them, clean it, grease it, put it back together, and then I'd leave it in the back of my truck, and they could find me in the middle of the night and come back to my truck and get their reel back and go out. But it was 704s. They were super easy to fix. You could do it in the dark, on a beach, in the sand, on your lap sometimes.
Now, did you see Kiko? We're going to come back to that. Hubba is on my list of things that I want to talk about. I've actually met that guy out on the rocks. Definitely want to talk about him in a second.
Hubba's a great guy.
Did you see this? Because like we're all obsessed with Van Stalls, right?
Yep.
Did you see those crack reels when they first started to come out?
Yeah, my buddy Al Rispoli, Dennis Zambrata's partner. He was from Long Island, and he moved up. Probably, I don't know. He didn't always live in Newport. He moved from Long Island and he moved up here, but he was the first guy I ever saw fishing a crack reel before.
Okay.
I had never seen anything like that. And Van Stalls were kind of new on the scene for us. That was like something that was starting to come in. There were a bunch of different, there was a reel called a Quick that a lot of guys used. A lot of guys used 704s. A lot of the plug-in guys used 706s because it didn't have a bail wire on it. It was just a knob, which was basically just like your Van Stalls.
Yep.
It was the early version of a Van Stall, I guess.
Okay. They look the same. They look exactly the
same exact design. Just Van Stall took it a little further with the aircraft aluminum and the machining and everything, and the price. And like you just always kept fishing Penn, and like when you were fishing bait, like I guess I fish Van Stalls because I'm like in the surf, right? Like I'm swimming.
Yeah.
And before that, like I didn't fish any of that. I fished Daiwa, or my first reel was an Akuma reel, and like this sounds weird, but like I beat the crap out of that reel, and it's still fine. Yeah. And I think I got it actually as a Christmas present from my uncle, and it's still fine. So cheap reels sometimes like do great and last a long time. So when you're bait fishing, where are you? You've got your waders on. How far out are you going out on rocks? Are you standing on the beach? Block Island's got this crazy shoreline where you got Southwest Point that goes out, right? Yep. And you're going to be able to describe this much better than I am because I've been out there a handful of times. You've been out there your whole life. But
Southwest Point is like sandbarish with those the rocks in the middle.
Yeah.
But then you go down the bottom of like the stairs or something like that, and it's drop off as the tide goes out. It's drop off beach with rocks. So talk about bait fishing. Those two separate areas.
All right. The first thing I can tell you is I have never bait fished at Southwest Point. I promise. That is hallowed ground for pluggers, and that is the last thing they want is some dope with a chunk standing in the middle of the bar. It can be done. I know guys that have done it, but personally, I've never stood on Southwest Point. There's a great spot south of Southwest Point that we learned as kids when the adults were all on the bar. Sometimes there'd be 20, 25 guys on a bar that's not 100 yards wide. So it was really, really tight. So we couldn't fish in that.
That's the lineup, right?
That's the lineup.
That's the lineup.
And
That's what we're talking about.
You had to be sharp. I mean, you had to be sharp to cast it. You had to understand the swing. You had to know what kind of plug you were using. You had to have real good faith in the guy next to you. And if you stuck a fish, it was interesting to see. You learned who your friends were really quickly. You learned who was either going to get out of their way, lift their rod up so that you could go underneath. That was a tough spot for a young kid to fish. So we fished down the beach. We just started finding
That's a tough spot for anybody to fish.
Yeah, so we would just find spots like, all right, well, so you go to Southwest Point. We would go way down to the right-hand side of Southwest Point towards Cooneymas, and there was some big giant rocks. We found a little spot where you could bait fish in there, and you could throw a little chum and get the chum to stay in the rocks.
And this is you and Joe Perry's son?
Me and Joe Perry's son, Jerry,
yeah.
So we would do that. We'd work down there, or we'd work way to the left towards Dickens and Lewis Point, and there's a nice little flat there we learned we could fish at high tide. But we tried to stay away from Southwest.
And you're just walking, right?
And you're just walking. We just grab our bucket,
hoofing it.
Yep, and just walk and find a spot to sit.
So crazy, man. I guess how far in Joe's mind was on an island. So where are they gonna go?
Out of eyesight in the daytime, and then at nighttime it was out of light blink. If he wanted to know if we were okay, he'd take the headlight and blink, and we'd blink back, and then he knew we were so conscious and alive and not washed off the beach. So they're good.
Now you've got you one night where you were out. It was freezing cold. You've told me this story. It was freezing cold and you're fishing.
Yep.
And Joe comes, and Joe is Joe's son.
Yep.
Is just kind of chilling, but you're out there fishing.
Yeah, Jerry was in the truck. It was I think it was the night of the Southwest. The night of the snowstorm blitz. It was cold and getting colder. Like it was into the 20s with a stiff northeast wind. And
because you'd taken the plane out, the bar you wanted to fish.
The bar was packed, and we were not going to be able to go to Southwest. So
was Dennis out there? All those guys were out there.
All those guys were already out there. Yeah, crews of guys were already out there, and more guys coming. Any available ferry that guys could get on, or if they knew guys that had boats, lobster boats, they would get on lobster boats, and lobster boats would drop guys off in town, and cars would come down and pick the guys up off the lobster boats, and then the lobster boats would go offshore. Any way you could get out there, you tried to get out there.
I can't believe you caught that plane over.
Yeah.
That's crazy. In a snowstorm.
In a snowstorm, in medical supplies. It was crazy.
That's crazy.
So we went out to the North Rip, and we were fishing, and it was brutally cold. And like I said, Jerry fished more for his dad than he did because he really liked to fish. His passion wasn't fishing. I had more of the passion. So I'm on that bucket, like I am planted on that thing, and I'm fishing my chunk. And the chunks that I'm sitting on in the bucket are frozen solid. Jerry's in the car sleeping. And finally, Joe came walking down.
You were beating the 5-gallon bucket to get chunks out.
I was chipping them with a knife to get chunks out, and then hooking frozen chunks and throwing them out there to thaw in the water. And Joe was 100 yards away, and he made it down to me. He said, "Where's Jerry?" I said, "He's in the truck." They went over and ripped the door open. "Get out! I didn't pay for you to come over here and sleep in the truck." So Jerry comes down all pissed off and takes a chunk and he throws it out. And the cast went sideways. It landed, and he's wearing these big giant gloves. He can't cast. It landed 5 feet in front of me, over my line. And I was so cold, I didn't even care. I was just huddled up. And the next thing you know, he's getting ripped off his bucket, and he sets the hook, and he comes right over my line. He's dragging his stuff over my line, and finally gets the fish up on the beach, and it's 46 pounds. And
oh my God,
I was like,
brutal!
The kid had been freezing out here for hours. This kid just got out of the truck.
Oh my God, that's brutal.
It was a horrible slice of humble pie. Like that ate me up.
You must have been pissed.
Oh, it ate me up as a kid for a long time because it went against everything those guys were telling me. Like the guy who puts in the most time is the guy who's the most successful. And I was out there putting in time, man. That kid just walked out of the truck and scored. I was like, this is not going to be a fun sport. This is not going to be a fun sport, man. There's no justice in this sport.
So you came, you were in Block Island, right? And
Yep.
you put a lot of time in, and you definitely you cut your teeth with all those guys, right? That you showed them that you were there, you were there to stay. You were humble and you fished and you kept your mouth shut, so they would keep you around. Now going back to where you live, right? Middletown. You lived in Middletown your whole life. Middletown, Newport, your whole life. Where did your fishing career kind of take off in Middletown and Newport? Was that at the same time as when you were fishing at Block Island, 15, 16 years old, or after? Or?
Everything kind of took off at one time. Like once I met Joe at the Causeway and started giving him pogies, and he started taking me fishing. Then he hooked me up with the Newport County Saltwater Fishing Club.
And you just met this guy Joe. You were just at the Causeway and you met this guy Joe.
Yep.
So that's something to keep in mind real quick. He's talking about Joe Perry all the time. Joe Perry was a stranger, and it just
the attraction was my full 5-gallon bucket of pogies.
And Joe Perry was a stranger, and that's what I think is the most awesome about striped bass fishing or fishing in general is that Joe Perry saw Brian bait fishing, and then now all of a sudden Brian is on Block Island in a biplane, going fishing. So just to kind of reflect on that real quick, I think that's important. Is put those bullet points in your head that you never know who you're going to meet or what's going to happen with this fishing thing. So you're back in Middletown fishing.
So he hooked me up with the Newport County Saltwater Fishing Club, and
was Dennis the president then?
Dennis has been the president my whole life.
Forever.
And
Dennis.
And will be the president forever because there is no greater man on the planet to run that club.
Oh, wow. Applause to Dennis.
Dennis is just amazing.
That's awesome.
The heart and soul of that club for sure. No one could ever fill those shoes.
Yeah.
So.
The meetings are great, super casual. I'm in the Newport County Club as well as the Narragansett Club, and both great clubs. But it's awesome to be in a room with the Middletown guys and Newport guys for sure.
So Dennis and all those guys were in the club already, and that was a great experience learning there. They taught me a bunch being in the club, and then I got a car and I started traveling around. And I started figuring out how to learn other places. So I decided I wanted to learn Narragansett. That's one of the more famous spots. So I went over to Narragansett and being a bait fisherman.
Why did you want to come over here?
Because you always hear when you're in Newport, you hear about how good the Narragansett guys are.
When you're in Narragansett, you hear about how good it is in Newport.
See what I'm saying? So they're different sides of the grass isn't always greener on your side of the bay. But I wanted to learn Narragansett. There were spots over there that I had heard, Point Judith Lighthouse and Deep Hole, and there were spots I wanted to learn and heard about and read about in the Fisherman magazine. So I said, I got a car now. I'm just going to go do it.
The Fisherman magazine. Were you ever in the Fisherman magazine?
Yeah, a few times. They wrote a couple articles once, and I was always trying to always keep my name in the fishing report. That was for me, that was an important thing. If your name was in the fishing report, all those guys I grew up reading, you knew you were doing pretty good. So
yeah, definitely.
So I started fishing Narragansett, and then I started to meet Narragansett guys, and they were all curious, who is this kid bait fishing in our plug-in spots?
Yeah.
What is this? So one of the first guys I met was Tom McGuire and Mike Dunphy. Those were the first two guys that I met in the Narragansett Club. And Tom McGuire is an amazing fisherman. Amazing fisherman. He taught me so much.
You just happened to cross these guys?
And we just happened to cross paths with each other. And he was fascinated by this. What are you doing? I said, I'm fishing. He's like, yeah, but you're bait fishing. You can't bait fish here. And I said, well, I think I can.
Yeah.
And he goes, this is not a bait fishing spot. What are you doing? He was kind of blown away by it, but also at the same time kind of intrigued and fascinated. So 2 or 3 times of fishing with Tom, and we were at this really very good spot in Narragansett that I am not going to say the name of. And I ended up, I stuck a fish. My first fish was 25. And I brought that fish in, and Tom had just started to come down on the beach. And he saw me with the fish, and he's like, I guess you can do it here. I said, yeah. And because I don't wade out as far on the rocks as those guys do, they go out a lot further. So
Okay, so that
I'm
brings
fishing
the
in a
answer to
little bit
that. You're in a
shorter.
little
I'm in a
closer.
little closer water column than they are, you know.
Yep.
So he's like, oh, that's good. So he went out on his rock, and about 15 minutes later, I stuck another one, and this one was 47. And that's when he like started to realize, like, all right, this kid is legit. Like, he knows what he's doing. And there were a bunch of other guys there that were pretty famous Narragansett guys. I know Dave Pickering was there, and I think Andy Lamar was there. And that's when those guys were like, look at the bait fishing kid.
Yeah.
This is like, I've never really seen this before. So
everybody else around you is plugging, and you're sticking with the bait. How? So you never like saw everybody else plugging, and you were like, I want to plug.
No, because it was if those guys were catching fish on plugs, I was determined to try and get them on bait. There's something that I can do to try and get those fish on bait. Like, if they're fishing with plugs and their plugs are all white and pink, I'm going to take the weight off my squid, and I'm going to take a bank sinker, and
Okay.
I'm going to stuff a bank sinker inside my squid, and then I'm going to hook the squid through the eye of the bank sinker. And now I'm going to take that squid and throw that squid out there, and I'm going to bounce it off the bottom, and I'm going to use it like a rubber worm, and I'm going to use my squid like a plug. And I was determined to do it on bait. If they can do it on plugs, I can do it on bait. Bait is real. It stinks. It's what they're naturally eating. I can make it work.
When you're squidding, are you chumming when you're squidding?
No. Just with light.
No.
He who has the most light wins.
No, I mean like when you're
when I'm fishing.
When you're fishing with squid.
No,
you're not.
The squid do all that on their own.
Okay.
They don't need any extra help.
Okay.
The squid are perfect.
So you were doing all these Newport County tournaments too, right?
Yeah.
When you were in the Newport Club?
I would do the Newport County Club every year. The Newport tournament. When the RISA came out, I started doing all the RISA tournaments. Once I started to fish in Narragansett and I started to move my way down the coast, I made it down into South County, and I met a group of guys down there that were part of the Rhode Island Mobile Sports Fishermen Club. And there was a really nice guy named Art Noyes that was, I believe, the president of the club at the time. He was an older gentleman. He met me on the beach, and he showed me a lot about how to fish open water sand, how to find structure when there is no structure. And that was tough because that was a hard area to fish.
Sand is, in my opinion, I have a lot of respect for people that fish sand well, because sand is hard to fish.
And it's the worst.
And it changes. Just look at the mouth of the Narrow River right now, or the whole Narragansett Beach.
Yeah.
Smoked.
Gone.
It changes every season, every week, a storm. It's just, it changes like crazy.
So once I joined the Rhode Island Mobile Sports Fishing Club, that gave me a real good idea there. So now I had learned all of the South County, and I had my South County guys. I had learned all of Narragansett. I had my Narragansett guys. I had known Newport from growing up in it. I had all my Newport guys. So I had a really good backbone of guys to network off of.
So now what's funny, right? Was like, right, I'm relating it to the way it is now, because everybody's so tight-lipped about fishing in spots.
Yeah.
Now you had just for the sake of this conversation, say 4 or 5 guys in Newport that you were tight-lipped with, right?
Yeah.
And then you would have 4 or 5 guys in Narragansett that you were tight-lipped with. So, but you wouldn't share any information between them, and you would just keep it for yourself?
Once in a while, you could. It depends.
They had to be a give and take. How did you skirt that line and not piss anybody off?
If I wanted to know what was going on over in Narragansett, I would call Tom McGuire. Okay. Everything was done by landline telephone.
Yep.
So I would call Tom McGuire.
No cell phones, no GPS, nothing.
No GPS. Maps, yeah.
But map. Break out a map.
Break out an old-fashioned map, yeah. Or, some guys would have charts. Some guys would go to places at low tide, and they would sit there and they would draw the rocks, and they'd have charts.
Really?
Moon tide was great for doing that. If you really want to learn a spot, go there at moon tide and try and get to an elevated position and look into the water and just draw. We would draw where the rocks were.
Elevated position. Are you talking about the top of a bluff from
like the top of a bluff or the top of a hill, or and stand on the top of your car. Just try and get up and look so you can look down into it. You can see the rocks and stuff. Where were we?
I don't know. Let's move into buggies and cars, because you just brought that up. So what was the so everybody talks about right? So I've listened to Steve Campo's episodes. He's got 4 episodes on Surfcaster's Journal, right? So what was buggies and cars like when you were out on Buck Island?
They were awesome.
Yeah.
Everybody's vehicle was set up for fishing exactly the way they needed to. The vehicles were all giant. All the guys from Long Island that were like in New Jersey that were serious, they all had big coolers and racks, big metal fabricated welded racks with a big 100-quart cooler in the front and 2 milk crates on either side and fishing pole holders straight across the front and the fishing pole holders down the side.
And they were coming over on the
And
ferry.
they were coming over on the ferry. Steve Campo had in his crew of guys, there was a guy named Marty, and he had the biggest truck I've ever seen. We used to call it the War Wagon. It had a wooden house built in the bed of the pickup truck. It had shingles. It had little windows.
What?
It had a door on the back with steps that came down, a metal stovepipe. There was a wood stove in the back.
In the back of a pickup truck.
It was the craziest pickup truck I ever saw in my entire life. We called it the War Wagon, and it was loud. They would start that thing up 15 minutes before they would fish and just let it rumble in the parking lot and woke everyone in the hotel up. That thing was loud.
I guess they knew when he was going fishing.
Yeah, for sure. But the vehicles were awesome. Everybody had a vehicle that was like built to their suiting, and each vehicle was uniquely individual to the fisherman. It was really cool.
Do you catch your own bait?
I do if I can. I mean, if there are pogies around, I will always snag pogies. Squid, I never miss squid season. I always try and catch as many squid as possible at the beginning of the season.
We do squidding a lot.
Yeah.
We do the squid. When the squid are around, squidding is fun. I don't know if any of you guys have ever been squidding, but squidding is a great time. How do you squid, Brian? How do you go squidding?
I build my own. I try and build everything myself. I build all my own rigs, all my own sinkers, all my own squid jigs. Find any dock in Newport, 12 to 15 feet of water with a good amount of dock pylons. Juice the water with as much
Public docks. Don't get yourself
docks,
pissing people off on private docks.
Juice the water with as much light as possible. And there are new lights now within the past 15 years. There are guys using green lights and blue lights. And I personally don't think it makes any difference just because I don't know any better. So I just stick with as much white light as possible. Juice the light and then just stay right there and jig
And squid.
and squid, and they'll come eventually. Especially if you have a light, the more light wins usually.
So when you were, you were part of. Dennis just brought this up the other day in the surf casting the block profile, and it's like a sensitive subject. But I think that it's the history of striped bass fishing, and I think that is important to talk about because without it, I don't think that striped bassing would be what it is now. Without the era of striped bass fishing that you were a part of, where you were fishing and you could sell fish. And you were, that was helping you supplement income.
Yeah.
So, what was that like part of your life where you were fishing, and fishing then became something where you were like, all right, now I can do this to, help provide for my family.
That opened up the doors to a lot more fishing opportunities. Once I realized, and it was a kind of a quiet sort of thing. A lot of guys didn't really talk about where they were selling their fish because it wasn't the most legal thing in the world. We didn't have numbers. We were not commercial fishermen, but we could get our hands on big fish. And you can go right to a restaurant in Newport, and if you could make an arrangement with the chef, go to there ahead of time and talk to him and tell him, hey, look, I'm a fisherman. I'm pretty savvy. I can bring you these fish still breathing. Like once I get the fish and get it out of the water, I'm leaving it. I'm coming right to the restaurant with it. And they would give you the best price. We were getting like $2, maybe $2.25 a pound for them.
Is this in like the 80s and 90s?
In the 80s and 90s, yeah.
Yeah.
And downtown Newport at the time was becoming a flourishing tourist community. So those guys in the restaurants, they couldn't take those fish fast enough.
Yeah.
So we would go out and you were allowed to catch 2 fish a night. So we would go out and catch our 2 fish in the 20 to 30 pound range, stop at the restaurant, drop them off, make a little over $100, home, work the next day, pogies with your money the next day at the bait shop, and then back out to repeat the cycle. But there was always a little bit of money left over, and I always took that little bit of extra fishing money and stocked it away for Block Island trips. So I was using my seasonal fishing money that I made to pack away for Block Island trips, because then I could go to Block Island and stay there for longer periods. hide in the woods and nobody really pays attention to you. And so we started bringing our tent over there, and we would go and just stay for weeks at a time. We just put our tent in the woods, back ourselves into a really super secret area, try to be as quiet as possible and not draw any attention to ourselves.
And you would just stay
just
in tents, camped out there.
Live in tents and just stay camped out there for a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did it. I've done it out of a car, but I don't know if I've done it out of a tent.
We did the car thing a few times, but sleeping in the front of a Mitsubishi Montero is not nearly as comfortable as the tent. And we started to realize that like the areas we were fishing on Block Island were pretty remote, especially if you were willing to walk away from the truck.
Now, what do you mean by that? I mean, we're talking about an island. What do you mean by remote?
4-wheel drive access road only. And then, when you get down to the end of the road, there'll be a deer path that'll take you another 100 yards into the woods and lead to a big open clearing. So that's what we would do, is we'd find these 4-wheel drive roads that were just too extreme for the cops to even want to go down.
What kind of cop? There's cops?
Yeah, there's usually one at night. And it was funny because Block Island was not nearly as popular as it was now. Now there's like a lot more bird watchers and nature walkers and stuff. In the fall at Block Island that time, there was nobody over there. The fishermen were the lifeblood of that island. So when the few tourists left in the summer, the hotels and restaurants, they were begging for the fishermen to come. They welcomed us with open arms. They were nice and accommodating, and the island was basically deserted. So we had the run of it. The cop used to sit at his house. He'd get home from work at like 6 o'clock. He'd park his car, and then he never moved for the rest of the night. So we learned, like driving around the island at night, that police car never moves. So we didn't really have a lot of worry. So we could find a little area where you could hide, put your tent, set it up, and we were there for a week, sometimes 2 weeks at a time. And if we were catching fish, we could sell the fish at the restaurants on Block Island and make a little money to stay at Block Island so that you could afford to live there.
And you would stay. You could extend your stay.
We were able to, because gas over there was expensive, and if the trucks run low on gas, we'd sell a few fish and buy gas at an exorbitant rate, but put just enough to keep us running. Until maybe someone from Newport was coming over, and you could ask them to bring you a 5-gallon gas can.
It was that much cheaper.
It was
to have them bring.
It was that much cheaper. To have guys bring a gas can to you if they could, because there was always someone coming from Newport. And you could call back to the bait shop and ask, like, hey, who's coming over this weekend? Can you have them bring me pogies and 8-0 hooks?
And you're not calling from a cell phone.
No, you got to call from the payphone. And Sam.
Now, what happens if there was like an emergency out there? Like, if you're out on the rocks and like somebody gets hurt, like what did you do then?
Honestly, I can honestly say I was never lucky, and I'm never unlucky enough to have that happen. I never had to experience. I never had to experience what to do out there in an emergency situation. The craziest emergency I ever had was I locked my keys in my truck at the steps at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that sucked because I had to hitchhike back to town at 3 in the morning, which was more of a walk than a hitchhike. Get to the police station. The guy at the police station now has to call the one guy on the island who has the kit that can open the door.
Locksmith thingy.
So he pulls into the parking lot after about an hour and 40 minutes of me waiting for him. He pulls into the parking lot and he hops out of the truck and he looks at me and he goes, your keys are in your truck? I said, yeah. He goes, how much do you got?
How much money do you have?
That's what he said. Was the first question he said to me. How much do you have? And I was like, well, I think between the three of us, we've got about $115. He goes, that'll do.
Really?
Yeah. He went over and he put his little kit together and he popped the door, opened it up, and he grabbed my keys. And we reached into our pocket and pulled every available cent that we had, and it was about $115.13. And he took it all.
Really?
But I had my keys.
No, so was there any other like crazy things that happened to you on the island that come to mind?
Yeah, lots of crazy fishing stories.
I like the one where you moved the fish.
All right, that was a good one. We had one of our camping trips we had going over. We went over, we set up our tent, and the tide was later on in the evening, so we were going to sleep for a few hours during the day, wake up, and then go out fishing. On the beach was probably one of the best bait fishermen in Newport. This guy, Mike Conley, good friend of mine, great bait fisherman. Him and his partner were already on the beach fishing when we showed up. So we went and set up our stuff. And we're supposed to lay down and sleep, but it was daytime. I can't sleep. So I walked to the edge of the cliff and I looked down to see what Mike and Rich were doing. And Mike is like leaning 40 degrees backwards and the rod's just curved over. And I'm like, oh, he's on. So I run back to the tent. I'm like, get up, you guys. Conley's on. So we grab our stuff and get all our gear. We went down onto the beach. We went way to the left of them. And we started catching some fish. And we got some really, really nice fish. To the point where we exhausted ourselves and we were tired.
Yeah.
We're done. We
Catching so many fish.
So many fish. I caught a fish that was very, very close to 50, like 48 to 50 pounds. Multiple 40s, multiple 30s. And we were just exhausted and kind of spent and had enough. So we decided, all right, we're going to break off of this and go do something else. We'll go eat and we'll go for a ride around the around the island. Maybe we'll fish somewhere else. So we took off. When we took off, we stopped at the phone so I could call back to Newport and tell the guys at the bait shop, come, they're here.
Yeah.
So now more guys are going to come that night.
So see, that's not to cut you off, but that's so opposite of what would happen now. Yeah. Nobody would do that now. No. Nobody would be called.
Newport was a great community for some reason. Block Island was a little Newport at certain times of the year. Like there were more Newport guys there than any other group of guys. So it was the sharing of information was really pretty free as far as is the island turned on or is the island dead and slow. Guys were always willing to give you an idea. They weren't telling you where they were going or what they were doing, but they tell you if it was on.
Gotcha.
And that was always the thing. If you got the fish and it was happening, you call back home. Even if you had to call collect, you'd call Sam collect at the bait shop. He'd accept the charges, and then he'd spread the word. If you guys are going to Block Island, go. Ernest just called and he said,
that worked out for him. He paid for the phone call because guys are going to stock up at his shop before he's going over there. Gotcha.
And you could always call Sam and say, hey, next guy's coming over. I need sinkers and leader material, or I grab them a handful of cleats. I need to put replacement cleats on my cleats.
Yeah.
So the guys, it was a great network of back and forth, things like that. Guys were always coming and going.
So you stopped by the payphone and you called back to Newport. Yep. And then where did you go
back
from there?
To Newport, and then we just went farting around. We went to the bar for a little bit and hung around and had dinner there and shot some pool and stuff. And more guys were coming over, and a group of guys from Portsmouth came over, and they went down onto the beach. So about 12 or midnight that night, we go back to see what's going on. And the guys are all still down there, and there's more guys there. The parking lot is really pretty packed now. There's got to be maybe 10 or 15 guys down there. And we look down, and we can see there's a few nice-sized fish on the beach. Some guys had caught some nice-sized fish and stuff. But there were so many guys there at that point. We figured, you know what? It's Sunday night. Let's let all these guys clear out of here, and then tomorrow morning we'll have the beach back to ourselves. It'll be the beginning of the week. It'll be good. So we went back to the tent, we drank some beers, we lit a fire, we hung around, we passed out. We woke up the next morning at like daybreak, and I went down to the beach and I looked, and those guys got into the fish again, and there had to be maybe 20 or 30 carcasses over 30 pounds stripped from meat, and the carcasses were just laying on the beach, and it was like a seagull ponderosa.
Now, why did those guys strip those fish instead of sending them over whole?
I don't know what their motive behind it was. I don't know if they were taking the meat for themselves. If they thought
that's a lot of meat to take for yourself.
If they thought they couldn't keep that volume of fish fresh in body
that
form,
size, yeah.
So let's strip it, and we can do a layer of ice, a layer of fillets, a layer of ice, a layer of fillets. I don't know what their motive was, but they stripped every single one of those fish bare, and there were carcasses all over the beach. And I looked and I was like, holy shit, we got to get these fish out of here. We cannot leave this here. Word is going to get out quick that this happened. So my buddy Jimmy Lombardo and Chris Peckham were my two close partners that were with me on that trip. We went down to the lobster yard, grabbed 125 feet of rope and a big oil tarp and a pallet, threw it in the back of the truck, went back to the spot. I went down onto the beach, and those guys threw the rope down the cliff, and I tied every carcass to a rope, and we hand hauled them up and put them in the bed of my truck, and we drove them all the way up to the north end of the island to Cow Cove, and we threw all the carcasses on the beach there to try and draw the sight line that's where the attraction was. That's where the fish blitz was. It was not on our beach.
Yeah.
We were protecting that thing like everything we could. And that night we went back down to the beach and we caught fish on the south end. And when we went to the airport the next morning, we heard that there was a big fish kill up the north end. And that, the Neanderthals, they stripped us clean and left the carcasses right there. I don't know what that was about, but man, there was some fish kill. And boy, that north end was busy that night. There were a lot more cars up the north end than there were down bothering us on the south end.
Wow, man, that's crazy.
Yeah,
that's crazy. So Chris, you brought up Chris Peckham. You fished with Chris Peckham.
Yeah, pretty much he's my main fishing partner.
Yeah.
We met each other at like 15 or 16 at the Causeway.
Okay.
And I've been dragging that kid everywhere since.
Yeah. And then do you now, I like to talk about fishing partners. Now, having him with you through all of that was important.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
To balance.
Because Chris he was along for anything. You could say the most extreme stuff to Chris, hey, let's go to the stairs, fish for an hour, go to Dory's Cove, hit that for an hour, go back to the stairs. He'd go up the stairs 3 or 4 times a night. He didn't care. He just said yes. He just was along for the ride. Are we going to catch big fish? Yeah, we're going to catch big fish. Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Hey, it was great.
So can we talk about tackle for a second?
Yeah.
No, we got on your rod. When you're fishing a pogie chunk, what is your tackle setup? What does the end of your line look like before you get to your pogie chunk?
All right. You like I said, a sliding egg sinker. Okay. I don't personally use a fish finder. Some guys use fish finders. I like the sinker right on the line. So it's either a bank sinker. If there's a lot of current, I'm using a bank sinker. If there's not that much current, I'm using an egg sinker because, like I said, I always want that bait to roll. My leaders are usually 18 to 20 inches long. Number 1 barrel swivel on the top and an 8.0 Gamakatsu hook on the bottom.
Gotcha. Okay.
Hook.
Gamakatsu hook. Got it?
Yeah. And that is my standard rig for bait fishing with 25 or 30 pound Andy. 25 if it's smaller fish season, and if it's the spring or the fall and I'm looking to hit a big fish, then it's always extra 5 pounds.
So the purpose of the leader is just to put distance between your chunk and your weight, right? Yeah. So that the chunk can be
the chunk can float. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yep. Because you have your mono to mono.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly,
You're just mono to mono.
Mono to mono. Yeah. Okay,
gotcha.
And I don't use fluorocarbon. I just use a regular standard 80 pound test. I think what I'm using right now is Seagar. I think Brian can help me. It's a camouflage line. It's a 3-color camouflage line. It goes from red to blue to green.
Yeah.
But I really like that stuff. It's nice. It doesn't stretch a lot. It doesn't have a lot of stretch, so it's helpful on the hook set.
How late into Block Island are you fishing, into the season?
Middle of November. 2 days before Thanksgiving was the latest I've ever fished at Block Island and caught a nice fish. I got a 32 pounder 2 days before Thanksgiving.
Wow.
But that's the latest trip I've ever been, and I haven't replicated that. That was a one and done thing.
What part of the year was that snowstorm blitz?
November.
That was November.
November 11th.
Yeah,
1987.
Wow, that's crazy.
It was cold. It was a lot colder back then, boy, it seemed.
Yeah.
And maybe I was just a kid and I was wimpy, but it seemed a lot colder and a lot snowier.
We had
much more milder falls now than we did back then.
What else? So what else? Any other crazy things happened to you on Block Island? Any good stories?
Like I said, so many that I had a weird situation. Myself, my cousin Robbie, and Chris Peckham were fishing up the northeast corner of the island one night. We're all 100 yards apart on our rocks. Everybody has their own rock. Everyone has their own bag of bait in their pocket, and we're all fishing. And it's pitch dark. We're standing on our rock, and it was really weird. I thought somebody had come up behind me because very closely in my ear. So I thought I heard someone go to the point where I turned around and shined my light and there was nobody behind me. So now I look over at those guys and Chris is also shining his light and Robbie is also shining his light. So now all 3 of us got our lights on. I'm like, what the heck is going on? That is really weird. So I shut my light off and then I blinked to my cousin Robbie. Blink, hit the beach. So he hops off his rock, I hop off my rock, and we meet each other at the beach. And I was like, hey, did you just, he's like, did you just have someone go in your ear? And I go, yeah. He goes, and I turned around to look to see if it was you. I thought it was going to be you in the water saying, come on, let's go, we're moving. I said, no, dude, that was really weird. So that was a weird sort of an instance that we had at the island.
You think it was a ghost?
Don't know what it was, but all three of us had the exact same experience at the exact same time of somebody going in your ear, and we all three of us turned around. Like I said, we're 100 yards apart. It's windy. There's waves. You couldn't have a conversation. You're too far apart to have a conversation. But that was a weird.
Any weird lights or anything crazy you see? And like going on that, like I've been out on Block Island before in the middle of the night, and boats that are going by look like they're going by way faster than anything that's man-made can ever travel.
Yeah, yeah.
So like your mind definitely plays tricks on you.
Definitely
But
plays.
did you ever see any weird lights or anything strange like that?
I've seen weird comets and crazy shooting stars. And there was a period in the 90s, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was kind of like our little weird version of Northern Lights. It was kind of like some orange colored clouds in the sky. I've seen that over there before.
That's pretty cool.
Pretty neat. But you get great visibility in the sky at night over there because there's no artificial light. So you see more stars over there. It's amazing.
So now, what about some of the other guys that were on Block Island chunking with you, like Hubba and Opa? We want to talk about those guys and their personalities a little bit.
The craziest group, everybody is nuts in their own individual way. Mark Ducharme is probably one of the hardest fishing dudes that I have ever tried to keep up with.
Still fishing out there wicked hard. I was fishing. I was out there grinding the spot away in the fall in September, and it was like when we had all those storms coming through, and it was brutal. And there was this guy there in a red pickup truck, and he was just out there in his like Rundins, bibs, no waders or anything like that. And he's just so salty looking, and I was like, man,
that's Hubba.
And then like one day, like it was always in the middle of the night, right? And then one day it just like became daylight, and like he's looking at me and I'm looking at him, and those weird things happen that you just connect with people right? And he was like, "I'm Hubba."
That's his real name. You get the name everyone knows him by. I'm Hubba.
The fishing was awesome, and that's why it's probably why he was more apt to talk to a stranger or whatever. But I met him, so
he's an animal. He's an absolute animal. Like you cannot keep up with that guy. He will go fishing and he'll go down onto the beach at Block Island and he'll hit this point and he'll take 3 casts, and after 3 casts he knows that's it. I'm moving.
And he's a bucktail maniac.
Yep, he likes bucktails. He loves plugs. He makes his own plugs. He made a plug called the Scud plug.
The Scud is from him.
The Scud is from him. Yeah, that's Mark's plug. Actually, Dennis just posted a bunch on the Surfcasting Around the Block page this morning. A bunch of Scud plugs. And no two were the same. He had no pattern or had no plan really. He just knew he needed needlefish that he could fish Block Island with, that were heavy, that he could cast, and that were cheap, that weren't going to cost him a lot of money. So he just went and bought a bunch of broomsticks at the hardware store and cut them all into needlefish length and bought a lathe at Sears and went home and started cranking out plugs. But they were specific to what he needed, but they were really good.
Yeah.
Those things were good. They were fat up the front. They had indent recesses on the side. They had big googly eyes on them, big giant hooks through wire. They were like designed for Block Island, and they were heavy. You could throw them in the wind.
So there must have been, was he pumping out a ton of those? Because again, like reflecting back to Steve Campo and what I've heard him talk about is guys were taking all kinds of stuff and throwing it out there because the bite was needlefish.
It was needlefish.
And Twin Willows was the bait shop out there.
Yeah, Twin Maples.
Yep. Twin Maples was the bait shop out there, and they were doing what they could, but they could only get so much.
They could only get so much.
So guys were just taking everything.
Yep. And Mark would come over and he'd bring garbage bags
full of these. And was he selling them?
He'd drop them off at the bait shop so that the guys could have, because sometimes the distributor couldn't get you Gibbs, or they couldn't get you Super Strikes, or they were back ordered because the whole Northeast is now buying these things because it's needlefish time. So Mark would bring over a bag of them. He got to be quite friendly with the guy at the bait shop, and he would bring over a bag of Scuds and drop them off. And he was trying to crank out as many as he could. He was a commercial lobsterman, so he'd go out offshore, and then when he'd come back in, he'd try and balance fishing and plug making and restocking the boat and getting it ready to go back out offshore. So he would crank them out, but sometimes no two were the same.
Yeah.
Sometimes the eyes were off.
Sometimes they're just
the hook in the front didn't really match the hook in the back.
And they're just They're not. Are they through wire?
They're through
They
wire.
are through
Yep.
wire. Were they
But
through wire then?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
those needlefish that I have are like those needlefish
Yep.
are
They're ready to
25
go.
years old, 30 years old.
25, 30 years old.
Wow,
And,
man.
and but they were crude and quick. So no two ever fished the same. So sometimes you'd find, like I was just talking, I made a comment this morning, and my buddy Dr. Brian Oakley, he made a comment on one of the plugs that when you went to Sam's to look for scuds, if there was a certain characteristic you liked, like Brian particularly liked them to have fatter heads, he would have to go through every plug in the rack and find one with a fat head, and then you might have to sort through 12 other plugs and find another fat head, but not in the color you want. So you could go home and change the color because Mark just spray painted them. They were no fancy.
Oh, the spray paint thing. It's like you read my mind.
No fancy epoxy coatings or anything. So if you wanted a characteristic of a stud that Mark made, because like I said, no two are the same. Sometimes they'd be real skinny. Sometimes they'd be real fat.
Were you guys ever painting your own plugs in your hotel room, maybe?
Everybody had rattle cans of spray paint in the back of their car. As like you'd have your milk crate full of plugs, and then you'd also have your milk crate full of rattle cans. So if they were hitting purple and you didn't have purple, you're making a purple
now
plug.
You had purple.
And you'd have them hanging all off the back of your
hooks
truck.
And all. You're just spraying it on there.
You spray it right on there. No one worried about bucktails.
And this was all going on around you. So while everybody's around you messing around with spray paint and plugs and stuff,
I just walked through the fumes on my way with my bucket and bait to get to the. Excuse me, bait guy coming through.
Now, was it you that you guys, you were with your crew that you were with, and a guy spray painted the plugs in the hotel room and got a green tint on everything? Was that you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you spray painted the. Yeah. Go ahead.
I can't remember what it was. It was a particular kind of green. That the year of the needlefish, where everyone was throwing the needlefish, it was a particular color green. And for this guy, it was like 1978 metallic mint green from a Ford Pinto or something. It was automotive spray paint, and it was specific to a color of car, and that's what color he liked. But he would do it in the bathroom, and he would spray them in the bathroom because they had the bathroom exhaust fan.
Oh yeah.
But by the time we left Block Island, the bathroom looked like that 1978 Pinto. It had the metallic green finish, and it was on the sink, and it was on the faucets, and it was on the shower curtain, and it was really quite crazy.
You guys
if the door was ajar, when you moved the door, you could see the line on the floor where the paint didn't hit.
Did you get your deposit back for that hotel room?
I was a kid. I didn't have the deposit part of it. So while I saw what was going on and thought, something about that's not right. I didn't have to worry about pay. Yeah, I didn't have to pay anything on the way out of that.
Mouth shut, just gonna keep going.
Like I said, the hotels were really, really good to us. They would give us refrigerators, let us mess up the inside of the refrigerators, and trucking sand in and out of the hotel rooms, walking around in your cleats and stuff as you run in and run back out. The hotels were great to us. I mean, we didn't do any damage, but we used a hotel room.
Well, like you said, they wanted your money,
and they wanted our money.
You were out of season.
We were keeping them afloat, and they were just the super nicest people.
So that was kind of the personality of. Do you want to talk about Opa at all?
Yeah, Opa was Joe Perry's father-in-law.
Okay.
So
now, is that how Joe Perry got into it? Or
that's how Joe Perry got into it. Yeah.
Look at that little cascade effect there.
He happened to meet a woman whose father was one of the best fishermen on the island, an old German guy. And so Joe learned everything he could from Opa, and all of the information that I learned in turn from Joe was from the old man. But he was a funny guy. He was a character. He could catch some fish, but what a character. Always yelling in German, summon a bitch. That was his favorite thing to say.
Summon a bitch.
Summon a bitch, yeah, son of a bitch. But it was always summon a bitch. And he told the greatest stories. He was very animated when he told stories. He was a nice guy.
So then when you would come back, how about guys like Manny Montero or Billy Vieira?
Those were all of our local big bait fishing guys in Newport. Manny Montero, Leroy Addison, Billy. Billy was Joe Perry's fishing partner.
Okay.
And Billy was the guy who built custom rods. He was the one who taught me how to make custom rods.
Okay, so that's where back Ackwards Customs kind of came about right there?
That came from is Billy Vieira had an innate ability to build rods for some reason. He was just really, really good at it. And he built everyone's rods from start, or he'd repair guides. He did all that work. And I was fascinated by that. I had to learn how to do that because it was the only way I was going to be able to afford a custom is if I could take my old rod and strip the guides off it and rebuild it myself. So I sat with Billy several nights and spun rods, and he taught me how to do it.
You were now when you're building rods, right? Because this is a fun thing. I love I'm fascinated by the small little details about how this stuff worked, 30 years ago and, how it's changed. Talk about fixing a guide in a hotel room.
Fixing a guide in a hotel room. That's fun. First of all, you have to make sure your hotel room is big enough to be able to get
to put the whole rod in there.
Put the whole rod in there
because you don't have like a rack, so
no,
you're hanging the thing from strings,
so,
right? And in a book,
yeah, I would pull the shoelaces out of my waiter belts.
see what I mean?
Pull the shoelaces out of my waiter belts. And I always had hardware in the truck, so I would take eye screws and I would put an eye screw in the door jamb of the bathroom.
Oh, good.
And then I would.
I'm sure the hotel loved that.
The hotel loved that, and then I would put an eye screw somewhere else, and I would use the shoelaces of my waiter boots to hang the rod, cut the guides off of it, put a book down, put your spool of thread in a coffee cup, run the thread through a book up onto the rod so that you could get tension, a bunch of sinkers on top of the book to create tension on the rod. And then you could spin the guide back on, and then you would use Sally Hansen hard as nails, and you would paint that over the top of the string. And that was the only stuff anybody used in emergency repairs, Sally Hansen hard for nails.
And that would get you through.
And that would get you through. That would keep you fishing. Or you could do it really, really crudely and just electrical tape it back.
Electrical tape the guide on.
But sometimes if you catch a big fish, you've got a big fish on there, bing, 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 the guides will just pop right off because there's so much tension on them, they just pull through the tape.
Yeah.
So it was always best to wrap them with string and do the Sally Hansen. But I've done quite a few rod repairs in the hotel room.
And that would help.
Using my waiter boot strings to put the rod back together.
Now I'm sure like sometimes you do that to like help your buddies out, but that was also something that would help you get a few dollars here and there to get you through Block Island, or was it always kind of something you were doing as?
Not at Block Island, because when you were at Block Island, especially like the Newport guys that I fished with, we were always kind of on a shoestring budget. Everyone was always flying by the seat of their pants. So if you did a repair for somebody, first of all, if anyone came to me with a repair, it had to be a good friend.
Yeah.
Like if I'm going to stop my Block Island fishing to get you fishing, we better be pretty tight.
Yeah.
So that was always the first thing. But there was always information to be shared. Like whenever that would happen, be like, all right, look, dude, I've got your rod in my hands right now and I own you.
Yeah.
So dial me in. Where are you at? What are you fishing? What are you doing? And it was all usually coming from a plugger's point of view. A lot of the information wasn't pertinent, but what it would do is it would tell me where there were blocks of fish in certain points of rocks where if there weren't pluggers there, I might be able to go down and get my bait in there and get them on the same size fish. So the information was almost more valuable than the money when you were putting guys back together again.
So I like what you just said. So just kind of relate to, and you brought this up earlier about being a little bit closer in than what guys are casting out with plugs.
Yeah.
And Luke and Greg were talking about this last week where, they'd be retrieving their plug, and just before you get to like, the 15 feet in front of you where it starts to get really rocky, that's where you exist, is that 15 to 30 feet. So like, a plug is going out 200 feet. Like I can cast I went to a football field and I casted out needlefish because I wanted to see how far they're going. A red eye super strike needlefish on a Lamb glass 1201M with 45-pound test casts 210 feet. I write all that stuff down. You're casting 50, 60 feet.
And I'm not really leaning into it. It's more of a lob, my guess.
But that has a lot to do with your rod, right? Because you're using a moderate rod and you're loading up your chunk and your egg sinker on your cast, and that's kind of, you're like I've watched you cast. It's like a catapult kind of, but it's not. It doesn't have a lot of pressure
into it. Not a lot of
it.
speed to it.
No,
it's a slow arcing cast where I need to, but I'm not casting out real far because usually the areas that I'm fishing, there's some sort of a drop off. Like at Block Island, every beach has a drop off. You start to walk off the beach. 1 minute you're waist deep, the next minute you're neck deep. That little transitional drop off right there, that's always what I drag my bait to. Because if you're chumming Block Island, that's where your chum is going to sit, is right on the bottom of that little ledge. So when you cast out, your chum is in front of you at that ledge, but you're way out here. So I'll always drag my bait in and let it sit right on the inside of that little ledge sometimes maybe an extra 15 minutes. I'll just let it sit there because that's where the fish are going to cruise. That's as close as the fish will get in is to drop off of that ledge. And waist deep water is plenty deep enough for a 50-pounder to swim in.
Gotcha. Okay. And they're close. You're saying those fish are not as far out as we all think that they are.
Not the ones that I'm catching.
Yeah.
They're definitely not. Those fish are in close and they're grubbing for crabs and lobsters and sand eels, dead fish that have been pulverized against the rocks that are mixed in that little broken shoreline. That's my area. Like from my primary water is like from waist deep to just over your head high. That's like the water I like to fish in, skinny water.
So now, along with bait, I also want to ask you, like, to go into just striped bass as a whole. Now, from when you were, 25, right? What I've seen looking through all your photos and all that stuff, peak striped bass, fishing, through to now.
Yeah.
How has striped bass community and bait and fish changed over the last couple of decades?
Bait has gotten a lot harder to get, and it's gotten a lot more expensive. They didn't really have a lot of pogey restrictions during the height of my career fishing. So there's a company in Fall River called Arc Bait, and they have a plane and boat system. The plane flies over the bay. They find the school of pogies. They radio to the boat. The boat goes and drops a net, scoops up the whole school, and they're off. Gone. And it was depleting the bay, and guys in the bay were getting pretty upset by it because it was removing our natural bait fish for a company from Massachusetts, and they're pretty much destroying Rhode Island waters by doing it and taking all the fish. So they started to put restrictions on those guys where they couldn't go into the rivers. You can't go past this line, you can't go past this line, and it keeps the bulk of bait more in the bay now and more available. But because they've eliminated them from going up into those rivers, they don't catch as much. So now because they don't catch as much, they're twice as expensive. So now probably they're $25 a dozen instead of $25 for 100 pounds.
But do you think that like bait fish and species as a whole has declined since you've seen it, or do you think?
Yeah, for sure. You definitely can see the striped bass numbers declining for sure.
And their food source as well.
Although oddly, the pogies have really started to come back. The past 5 years, we're starting to see more pogies in the bay. Like Jake was talking about last week. He said that you can see the boats in Providence on those pogie schools.
Yeah.
That's something that's really started to happen more so like the past 10 years or so. I don't remember that happening that much as a kid.
Oh, okay.
That volume of pogies pushing up in the bay.
Now, has there always been like the squid population? Is there kind of just like always been a lot of squid?
Always been a lot of squid. Always a lot of squid. But that now the past few years is starting to get more hit and miss. Our past 3 squid runs in the spring have not been real good.
Gotcha.
So you really got to work for them, and when you find them, you got to stay on them.
Gotcha.
So if you happen to be out in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. and you find the squid and you're filling your bucket up, you're calling into work the next day because you're just standing right there. I'm not going to miss the opportunity to go out tomorrow and get 12 if I can get 100 tonight.
Right.
So I'll just call into work. Not coming in, squid.
Now, what about like the striped bass community? How have you seen that change over, of course, a period of time? Because like when you were fishing, like you could, keep fish and sell them, and that helped you out. And then like that became, like don't ever do that.
Yeah.
And then, now guys are, there's a lot of people out there that, I went to Block Island one night. I think it was my first night ever I went to Block Island. I went to the Southwest Point, and there were these 2 guys out there, and I walked out there, and they were like, the first thing these 2 strangers said to me in the dark were, "You ever been here before?" And I said, "No," and they packed up their shit, and they left.
Welcoming.
So that's what so there's some guys that are, that will take you on and teach you things, and there's a lot of guys that are steadfast and they're not going to talk to you much, and I totally understand all of that completely, 100%. I definitely do it to some newcomers here and there when I don't really feel like sharing. But like now there's no money involved, so now we're just kind of keeping quiet because it's going to protect. I don't want somebody to be on my rock when I go out there. So how have you seen that kind of change over the years?
The internet has just connected everybody. And it's connected every way. Some people in ways they don't want to be connected, and then other ways that people just can't get enough of it. guys can get information really, really super fast by just making a post like, hey, how do I do this? There's 100 guys jumping in to give you information. That was not that way growing up. Like if you wanted to learn anything, you either had to be friends with that person or go and spy on that person and find out what they were doing. But there were not a lot of guys willing to give out as much information as they are today. And there are a lot more guys today doing it. And
so it's become a little bit more helpful, and the community's become a little bit more helping each other out.
You know, okay, sure. And as far as like information with like gear and things like that, guys still aren't telling you much about what they're doing. And if they're putting pictures online, they're scrubbing out the background.
Oh yeah,
which is a good thing because I am great at digging into a picture.
401 plugs. You see, Will, he just caught a fish on an airplane and crashed into the river. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, the internet has made shit crazy. There's a lot more guys doing it. The guys that do it now are a lot more geared up. Everybody's got a van stall. Everyone's got fancy stuff now. Everyone's got a podcast. Everyone's got a line of information. Everyone's got people that they can connect with. So the information is a lot more prevalent, a lot easier to achieve, and there's a lot more guys doing it.
Yeah, just thinking now, you're making me think about how much work. We talk about fishing hard and everything now, but if I want to look up a tide, I just go on my phone. If I want to look at moons, I can go on my phone or my calendar or whatever. But I have a computer in my pocket that'll give me any answer to any question I ever want at any time. But you didn't have any of that.
We didn't really have a lot of that stuff. Now we had old school fishing logs. Everybody had a calendar. You wrote all your information down when you fished that night inside the box of your calendar. What the tide was, what the wind was, what you caught, what you were using. That was at least how I did my stuff, all with a calendar. Everybody had a tide chart. Sam's put out tide charts at the beginning of the year, and there'd be a stack of them on the desk, and you'd go there and get your tide chart for the year. And that was all your charts. And then you're looking at your Newport chart, but if you're fishing Narragansett, you've got to move those tides. Narragansett tide comes in before the Newport tide comes in. So there was always that. If you were lucky enough to know somebody that was in Narragansett that could get you a tide chart, then you have Narragansett tide chart, your Westerly tide chart. If you were fishing in Little Compton, those tides were different, so you had to have a Little Compton Westport tide chart. So you had to have a lot of stuff with you. You didn't just have your phone in the pocket. You just boom, 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 and get everything you wanted.
And I think we definitely take that for granted.
And because it was so crude, and the only way you could get information was by cutting your teeth and putting your face into the salt and learning it and forcing yourself to do it, guys were not giving that information up.
Yeah.
You had to really be friends with that guy for him to give you any information at all. They'd talk friendly with you, but they wouldn't give you direct information. My buddy Mike Conley, him and his buddy Rich were on the island one night, and they were at a spot, and they had just gotten to the spot, and they started fishing and immediately killed the fish, caught big fish right off the bat, first couple casts. And I'm on the island with my cousin Robbie, and we said, oh, hey, look, there's Mike and Rich. Let's go down and see what they're doing. So we go down onto the beach, and we see them, and they're saying, hey, what's up, guys? What's going on? Oh, hey, how's it going? How's the fishing? Not so bad. We got a few. Nothing special. Oh, nothing special now. Are you finding any bigger fish? Or are you getting any bigger hits or something that you think's bigger? We're having a tough time finding anything. Just stick on the south end, dude. That's what I would suggest. That's where it seems like most of the fish are, is on the south end. All right, Mike, thanks. Take care. All right, good to see you. We took off. Little did we know, the whole time behind us, they had the fish stuffed in the bushes behind us. Now, I've known Mike my whole life. We're in the fishing club together. We're great friends. But he is not dialing me into that bite.
No way.
He is sitting on that bite. And it was funny because Rich, who normally was the least talkative of the two guys, Mike was always the more talkative and Rich was always the more non-talkative. Rich was a little bit extra smiley and had a little extra he was a little extra pumped up.
Yeah.
And I thought something kind of looked funny about Rich's mannerisms because he wasn't so Rich when I went down there. And it wasn't until 2 or 3 days afterwards that we find out that, hey, did you hear Mike Conley stuck a bunch of nice fish the other night down the south end? And I was like, no, I didn't hear that. And then just through some deductive reasoning, I found out that that's what happened. Is I was standing right there, feet away from the fish.
Yeah.
Was not privy to that information because he wasn't dialing me in. He'll dial me in afterwards.
Yeah.
And tell me all about it.
Yep.
But at that moment, he's not dialing me in. And there was
great.
There was a lot of that.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that.
You've done that.
Oh, I've done that. Yeah. I was at Anderson's with a 43-pounder on, and there was a guy from Newport who I was not the greatest friends with in the world, and he was on the top of the cliff, and he's yelling down to me, "Are you getting anything?" And I am on. My drag is singing. And I have my cousin Robbie standing behind me to block my shadow. And I'm pointing my rod right at the water, almost kneeling down to try and keep my profile as low to the water as possible. And I'm going, "No, man, we've been here about an hour. Haven't done anything." He's like, "All right, I'm going to go try the steps. All right.
Excellent. See you later.
I'll touch base with you as I pull out of here. We'll hit the steps and come check you out. All right, good luck."
And there was no clicker? You couldn't hear it?
Mine, I used to leave the clickers on just because I liked the sound. A lot of guys used to take their clickers off, especially Southwest Point time.
Yeah.
You didn't want anyone knowing your drag was
So,
singing.
waves crashing all the way up on a bluff.
Yeah, I didn't go through all that. But most of the guys that fish 704s, they didn't have clickers on the underside of their spool. They take them off because they wanted to be quiet.
Very nice. So I like the story about how I met you. On my
internet.
The internet.
Damn internet.
The internet is how I met Brian. That 401 fishing page on Facebook, which I won't say anything else about because that's all I have to say about that 401 fishing page. But
it's a page.
It's a page.
It's a page.
So I put out. This was like 2020 or 2021. It was like November. I didn't know what I was doing, but I'd always heard about Block Island, and I really, really, really wanted to get out there. So I dragged my father-in-law. He's Mr. Boy Scout. So we were staying for 3 days, but we had probably about enough stuff to stay there for 2 weeks. So we are going to Block Island, and we're catching a ferry, and everything's booked up. And I brought I think I bought 24 eels. I just didn't know what I was doing at all. So I go on Facebook and I put it in the 401 fishing page, "Hey, I'm going to Block Island. I don't know anything about what I'm doing. I'm gonna go because that's anywhere I've ever started anything, I just try, and that's what happens." And Brian's on Facebook and he's looking through 401 fishing page and he sees this kid Steven, me, post this stupid post on 401 fishing that he's going to Block Island and he doesn't know what he's doing. And I don't know what made him take pity on me, but for the rest of the night that night, from the time I was on the ferry until I don't even know, dude, all night, 4 o'clock in the morning, every hour on the hour, he would check in and see how I was doing. And that was crazy, and he dialed me right in. And I don't know if you want to talk about that.
The desperation in the wording of your post is what got me. The first post was "Hey, I'm going to Block Island and I'm looking for some hip tips or pointers. If anyone has any ideas they could give me, that would be great." So that was the first post I thought, and I was like, "Yeah, right. Look at these kids with the internet. They just put this shit out there and ask for the world. Who's dialing them into Block Island?"
Yeah.
And that was
you.
That was at 7 o'clock. And then at 9 o'clock there was another post. 2 hours on the island, still haven't found anything, still working, any help. And then one at 11, and then one at 1. And then the one I saw at 2:30, and you were like, "All right, we are now in the parking lot at the ferry. We've given up. There's nothing else for us. We've tried everything, and we can't do it. So I guess I'm just going to sit here in the parking lot." And that's when I was like, "All right, I got to give this kid some help." So contacted you.
Yep.
Told you to go to Dory's Cove.
Yep.
Find that rock.
Yep.
And stand on that rock and cast until you pass out.
And that's
you will find fish.
I did that. I fished that rock for 12 hours. And that is no exact. From midnight to I had a 1:30 ferry, and my father-in-law was with me, and he actually got a fish too. I was fishing live eels, and because I go to Block Island, and I bought 7 green needle fish, like literally 2 dozen eels, and I'm casting eels, for, like, legitimately, I'm not kidding, 12 hours. And then like 6 hours, I think it was like 6 hours in. I think it was like 6 o'clock in the morning. Like a small school of striped bass, like 24 to 27 inches, came by. I managed to get two of them. I'm flashing my light and screaming at my father-in-law because he's down the beach, way down the beach, and he comes running. I mean, you can't run on Block Island beaches because it's all just boulder fields and break your ankle, whatever. It's great. But he actually got on a fish too, and that was my first trip to Block Island, and that's when I first met Brian. And then when I came back to shore, like, a few days later, still wasn't like cool with Brian. Brian was doing the classic fisherman thing, like, all right, dude, you caught a couple fish, fucking congratulations. Yeah. So then I was like, man, like, I gotta figure out how to get with this guy because he knows what's going on around here, and I wanted to, start fishing some different places. So I would, as an offering to Brian, because he was a pogie guy, I would get out of work and I would go and snag fresh pogies, and I would take pictures of the pogies in the 5-gallon bucket, and I would send them to him. And I'd be like, hey man, I caught you fresh pogies. Can we please fish tonight?
I have these pogies to offer you, sir. May I please come and hang out with you?
But that's what I had to do.
And I had this young protege in Warwick that had access to fresh pogies, so I was like, yeah, I'll take you on. Come on down. Just make sure you bring the pogies, all right? Put them in the truck first before you put anything else in the truck, and then you can come down.
God, it's so funny. It's just like reflect now. Now I talk to the guy every day.
Which is funny because I'm like full circle now because I had fresh pogies and Joe Perry wanted them and he was willing to teach me.
Yep.
And then you showed up and you're like, look, I've got these fresh pogies. And I'm like, oh, I need that kid in my life. The kid with the fresh pogies. That's what every old guy, every old bait fisherman needs a young kid with pogies in his life.
And I was always like, I could only ever manage to get like 8 or 9. I think like maybe one time I had like 10.
They were the best 8 or 9 of the night that I used. So.
Yeah, but you would still say, nope, that's not enough.
It's not enough. It's not enough. I had to set a precedent. I had to let you know that there was a certain amount of fresh pogies you needed to come with. I would take anything you could get. But I just wanted to set a precedent that like you need to come with 20. If you're coming, you come with 20.
Yeah, I was waiting for the nope, Steve, that's not enough. You can't come over here.
Actually, you just leave those with me and go back and get some more.
So that was crazy, and that's kind of how our relationship started. I fish with Brian a lot now, but it's just, again, you never know what's going to happen with the striped bass community or where it's going to take you. So I really like that story about how I met freaking Facebook, man.
Yeah, it's as good as it is as bad as it is. I've seen many good instances of people being super generous and helpful on Facebook, and then I've seen some really bad stuff.
Yeah, messy.
Yeah, just pictures of fishing spots and things like that. Like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah, and it doesn't. It's not. You like. I love to share fish pictures, and I want to talk about fish pictures with and like, geez, do I like to talk about fishing? Well, here we are talking about fishing for 2 hours. I love to talk about fishing, and I think we all do, and we all love to talk about our passion. But anything that I can do to protect the fact that when I get to my spot, I don't want somebody to be there.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's it. And that
Which is a fine line of being honest with your friends and not being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
You don't want to give up your spot, but you also don't want to lie to your friends at the same time. It's a fine balance.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I definitely think it's like a mental battle because you want to help your friends out because when you're struggling, you want them to help you out. But like at the same time, you don't want to just blow everything you just figured out of the water. And I don't know.
And when in doubt, if you ever get into that situation where you're catching fish, just don't call anybody.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody. Don't call anybody. Don't let anyone. Just stay on it yourself and enjoy it yourself. If you got like one buddy that you can bring with you, that's cool. But just try and be as tight-lipped as possible because the internet is crazy now.
The internet is brutal now.
You can drive in Newport. You can drive around the Ocean Drive and find everyone's car. And you know where everyone's fishing. And then the next morning you can go on Instagram and look at it just hand pick guys like, oh, I know he fished last night, so let's see. Yep, there's a picture. He got a 23-pounder. And then, oh, that guy was over at Ruggles Avenue. Oh, he got a 16 and an 8. And then, but you can find out what people were fishing because these guys will post their pictures the next morning. They're super proud to get their pictures online. Everyone wants to show everybody how good they are at fishing. There's no rewards in fishing. There's no accolades to being a good fisherman.
They're coming from
You're
you,
not-
Mr. Trophy Man.
You're still gonna have to put your shoes on and go to work every day.
It's true. True.
So it doesn't matter how good a fisherman you are, how famous a fisherman you are, how top hook you are, you're still putting shoes on and going to work every day. So be a little humble, share some information, help people out, you know?
I like that. Sharing does spark the drive. Bruce Bain, I was talking to him one day on the drive. I think we were going to the Connecticut Surfcasters show. And he was talking about how he was, talking to a kid. And he was like, I was like, yeah, you need to fish this yellow darter, and this is the rock pile. You need to fish it. And that's all I told him was, fish this yellow darter and fish on this rock pile. That leaves 40 hours of work left for that kid to do. That doesn't tell him really much of anything.
It doesn't dial him in. It just gives him a direction to go in,
And he could go there and he could hook up quick, or he could go there and he could show up there on the completely wrong tide, and it would take him forever to hook up on fish.
That was the great thing about not having the internet and seeking help from older guys or listening to older guys talk is they only ever planted seeds.
Yeah.
They didn't give you the whole plant.
Did you ever hear anything that they didn't want you to hear?
Oh yeah. I was a great eavesdropper. Oh, that was one of the things. I mean, if you were a kid and you're around all these guys, even though you're there, they're all talking in code. Everybody talks in code. So even if you were talking to a really good friend of yours about fishing, he's talking to you in code.
Don't say my code. Don't say the code. Don't you dare say the code.
In and out of figuring out what they're trying to say, because they're telling you truths. They're not telling you the truth. So you got to kind of pick what words are true and what words kind of bullshit and lead you astray. No one's ever really telling you the full truth. But that was, if you were listening to these older guys, they would never give you the full plant. They just plant a seed. It's up to you to make the seed grow. What do you do with that nugget of information that they're going to give you? How you expand on that is what you're going to get out of it.
But you were just a kid, so they were kind of maybe saying a little bit more.
They were saying a little bit more than they should have been, and they weren't really paying attention to how well I was paying attention to and how well I was digesting the information that they were giving me.
Yeah, because you were tuned in. And
I was tuned in, and I was listening. Even if I was over here doing something else, I'm listening over here because the adults are talking in the room. And if you want to be like them, you have to listen to what they're doing. So, like I said, I tried to absorb everything. I was a nosy little bastard.
Yeah. Well, hey, man. I mean, it got you on huge, gigantic fish
for sure
for a long time.
For sure.
So, anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah, that was a lot of good stuff. I mean, we could. There's so many things.
We have time.
We'll have to. I don't know. Just an hour and 45.
Yeah, that's fine.
So thank you so much. I mean, there's definitely going to be more stuff that we're going to talk about for sure, because you are a wave of I don't know what that means. Derek Papers. What that means. But yes, couple of quick things. Always want to say here at the end. Mental health is huge. If you're ever having a problem and you ever need to talk about. We'll talk about the time that Brian gave in Lady Papers. One day we were out working. I do landscape construction with Anderson Jr. there, and it was like a Saturday or something. I don't remember. Two people called out, and there was nobody coming in to help us work that day. And Brian had the day off, and Brian came in and helped us lay papers all day. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was fun. It was a good day.
Oh my God! Just show up in this pallets of 80-pound rocks to move around.
I'll do that.
Did you regret the Facebook messages that day?
Yeah, it was working for the government my whole life. It was definitely one of my harder days at work.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Brian.
Before we go, I just want to say one thing: is that thank you to everybody out there that ever took the time to share a nugget of information with me, teach me something, take me fishing, take me under their wing, lead me aside, show me a new fishing spot. Thank you to everybody out there that ever did that. I would not have the memories in my head that I have today if it was not for each and every single one of you. So thank you very much for what you taught me.
Huge. That's huge. Also, Backwards Customs.
Bass Backwards Customs.
Bass Backwards Customs. I always mess that up. Brian builds custom rods. So reach out to Brian for your custom rods. And you have your line of freshwater jigs, your chatterbaits, your regular jigs.
Spinner baits are coming out soon.
Yeah.
We might be working in a collaborative effort with Uncle Fish to come up with maybe a saltwater chatterbait.
Yeah. There's some stuff going on out there already with some of the. We'll figure out our little niche there.
Dangerous combination of the creativity between the two of us of what we can come up with.
Yeah,
so definitely. We'll figure it out.
Brian is a gigantic part of Uncle Fish Bucktails. Brian does all the lead head pouring and painting. So he's a huge part of that. So could not thank him enough for.
You can see the difference. The guy who breathes the lead fumes, the guy who does not breathe the lead fumes.
So couldn't do any of Uncle Fish without him. Absolutely not. So super grateful for Brian for that and everything that Brian has taught me. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that. Mental health is huge. So check on your friends. Just we're all big, strong men, and everybody's big macho. But sometimes people go through hard times. So just check on your friends and be safe. Don't wear Timberlands out on the rocks. I know you guys like to wear waders all the time, and I was going through pictures the other day, and I'm looking at my first night at Charlestown Beachway, and I had waders on and a t-shirt on and no surf belt and no surf bag, and I'm in my waders, and you can see like the gap between the waders and my chest, and how water would just go in there, and I'm standing on a rock, and the fucking is ripping out next to me.
Just couldn't be more of a victim.
Couldn't be, like, literally. If I fell in the ocean, I was gonna die. Like, if I fell in the ocean, I was gonna die. And I just looked back at those pictures, and I was like, man, that was so dumb. But I was just.
I think we all started somewhere.
Just dumb. I was just dumb. So just don't do that. Just don't wear waders on the. Luke's got a great demo video where he's got waders and the Z-belt and a surf top, and he's cinched up, and then he drops himself into a swimming pool. So I think you're safe there if you've got a nice jacket.
Or if you've got a belt on.
Yeah, and
especially that Z-belt.
That Z-belt
is just a nice
fat. Yeah.
Dude, and believe me, I come from an era where there were no Z-belts.
Yeah.
Like belt bags that guys were using, where they would go to an Army Navy store and they would get a Swedish Army gas mask bag. And then they would get the plastic fluorescent tube covers for fluorescent lights and cut those and wedge them in that bag. And those were like the first plug bags, slung over your shoulder. It was crude. I mean, we used what we had. That Z-belt is the greatest thing.
Yeah.
Like, I want to find a way to use that Z-belt for bait fishing.
Yeah. It's so gotta be back, man.
The width of it, the support it gives you, the ruggedness, like the material, that is well made. The Surfcaster made that thing. So
he absolutely did.
Yeah, that's a well made piece of equipment right there.
And that's what it actually was generated from. I don't know if you've ever looked at a Z-belt before. It's got a thick pad at the back, and then it kind of narrows out.
Yeah.
I was talking to Luke when he first was kind of making out with them. I bought mine, making them. I bought mine from him in a parking lot.
I remember you saying that.
Yeah, I got like the Gen 1. Yeah. And it was mainly for my back, dude, because I'm standing there plugging for hours and hours and hours, and now my lower back was just killing me. And then I put that Z-belt on, and I like kind of just put a little pressure on my lower back, and I could be out there all night long with no pain.
That's why I started looking at them is the lumbar support. I'm standing in one spot. I'm sedentary. I'm not moving nearly as much as you guys. Like, I move from spot to spot, but then once I get to my little area, I might be standing on my feet in the same 1 square foot spot for an hour and 45 minutes. I think that belt is going to do wonders for my back.
Huge. Yeah. Definitely. I got a spare you should try.
All right.
So safety is huge. The little Z-belt tangent there, just important. It's an affordable thing that solves a lot of problems. So definitely check out a belt if you're gonna wear waders, or get a wetsuit. They're cheap. If you're gonna be out there on the jetties, I just don't want to see something stupid happen to somebody that could be avoided. Corkers are huge. Corkers or Sims or whatever spike boot you want to wear. Definitely super important. Again, silly things happen if you make silly mistakes, and a silly mistake could be something that you don't come back from. So don't make a fishing trip, on a Tuesday night turn into something where you're in the hospital. Yeah, so sure. I mean, plenty of people hook yourself. I don't know how you do that, but just don't do that either. So, but thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Brian Ernest for president. I'm just gonna check YouTube.
Let's go, Brian.
Brian, What's a bait bridle?
Bait bridle.
We're gonna have to talk about that bloodline. I'm not sure what a bait bridle is.
I'm unfamiliar with the term. I may know what it is, but just be unfamiliar with the term.